Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 FM. I'm Paul Kretschmer. The title of today and tomorrow's broadcast, Prayer, Leading from Your Knees. Here's my guest to open our conversation on today's WIHS Journal.
Certainly. My name is Joe Turnham. I'm here in Tuskegee, Alabama, and I will be discussing the subjects in my book, Leading from Our Knees, Inspirational Daily Spiritual Precepts for Leaders of Faith. And there are a number of entries in the book that are germane to today's issues.
Why write something specifically for leaders of faith? Are you talking about people who are clergy or lay leaders in churches, or could you characterize for me in your own terms what that description that you've given means to you?
It's a great question, Paul. I think at some point in all our lives, whether it's in a situation, a day, a moment, a week, a profession, that all of us are drafted to be leaders. The leaders also are people that do humble tasks, but they do it through leadership of service. It could be lighting the furnace in the church every Sunday morning before everyone gets there while it's still dark so that the sanctuary will be warm. It's parents are leaders, and parents should be the primary instillers of faith in children and other family members. So you're a spiritual leader. At work, when you see any kind of injustice or a need for a change, you're a leader. Some of us lead through fervent prayer, but we're all called to be leaders of faith at some point. If we truly follow Christ, Christ will use us in leadership at some point.
There are many people who are called upon by the Lord to write, perhaps in some ways that are similar or familiar to you. How would you characterize what the Lord has shared with you specifically that enables you or encourages you to write upon the call that He has made on your life and on the lives of other Christians that you feel will be benefited and glorify the Lord as a result of what you've done?
Paul, in my 40 years of professional life, I've literally been in the political arena, the business arena, the spiritual, the lay leadership of churches, and I've seen every situation. I've seen every circumstance. I've met humble leaders. I've met heads of state. I've met fallen leaders. I've met arrogant leaders. I've met humble leaders, and I've been through a lot of trial and tribulation with that. So, some number of years, I was searching and really praying to God for some leadership, and I felt it laid upon my heart to take those experiences in life, comb the scriptures, pull these precepts of faith out that apply to leadership. And, a task that took almost 7 years became Leading from Our Knees, something that I felt led to do and felt like, God was the author and I was a scribe. It's a read through the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation. It's a timeless write, and over 180 characters of faith and 47 faith categories are in the book. And I think that it's something that I consider important. Leaders of faith, Luke, Moses, Paul. Not only were they called to be prophets and apostles, they were called to write. And I think all of us, whether we write old-fashioned letters or texts of encouragement, we're all called not only to lead, but to write.
Would it be possible for you to characterize your experience the way some other people I've spoken with in the past have been, which is I've spoken with people before who are looking for something, seeking something for their life, in their life, to affect both themselves and their loved ones around them. And in the end, the Lord said, I know you have this on your heart, but do not look outward for it. Instead, I will equip you to be what you are seeking.
Absolutely. That's really a great principle, Paul, because, there are instances throughout Scripture when the humble were called to do the tremendous tasks of faith and leadership, and they didn't have pedigrees, they didn't have education, they didn't have perhaps life experience, but they were tending sheep, or they were threshing grain on a floor. They were out in a boat casting nets. They were doing humble tasks. They were young teenage girls that God called through an angel to do something very special. So, we know that when we are humble and we are subservient, and we have an open heart, that God will find ways to use us and to show us. And sometimes He shows us through circumstances, through friends, through mentors, and through our own mistakes.
Would you characterize the leadership of people to be something that the Lord equips both you and other people around you, while at the same time making it possible for the glory always to be redounded back to Him, and that if we actually try to shine in front of other people, perhaps that the Lord will chasten us when it's necessary in order for us to remember that He is God and we are His people and not the Lord of the land, so to speak?
Absolutely. And you make a good statement there, and there are really 3 or 4 precepts in your question that can be pulled out of that. First of all, if God calls you to do something, He will equip you. Whether you believe it or not, He will. And that means you may have to put foot to the prayers. You may have to go back to school. You may have to learn a language. You may have to give up habits or addictions. You may need counseling, but God will equip you. He'll open the doors. He's a God of circumstances, and He will equip you. As you do lead, He wants you to stay with the task and stay humble. You make a great point. When leaders of faith find success, or they ever stop to revel at their own accomplishments, many times are when they are chastised, and we see it throughout Scripture. David said, "Boy, we're doing great. Look how great Israel is. I think I'll do a census." God didn't want that to take place. So, there are times when we see leaders fail. We saw it with King Saul. The Scriptures are replete with examples of that. And then sometimes our leadership journeys are finite in scope and time. Just because God may call you to a leadership task doesn't mean it's eternal. You may get elected to office. It doesn't mean you stay there your whole life. You may get called to a church for a season, for a purpose. And when that season or purpose is over, so is your journey, and you move on to your next calling. So, I see a lot of failures in leadership because leaders stay too long, and they cease to hear the still voice of God guiding them in that particular task.
I used to be an attender of the Metropolitan Opera in New York. For the first time when I moved here 38 years ago out of Iowa, I was actually close enough to New York City to go to performances after listening to them on the radio for a number of years. And one of the things I learned early on from people that I rubbed elbows with, so to speak, was it's better when you're in the performance arena to retire at the point at which people can say, "What, already?" rather than, "Well, it's about time."
That's exactly right. And we see that in a lot of professions. And because you're not performing in front of 1,000 people in an auditorium doesn't mean your next leadership journey is not one just as meaningful and fulfilling. Being a grandfather, or being a mentor, or being a wise sage, or being a prayer warrior are all things that are not glamorous. They're not being the tenor at the Metropolitan Opera, but encouraging the next tenor. And there's another thing I see a lot, Paul, in leadership, and that's when young leaders come along that God has called. We saw it with Saul and David.
We'll pick up this interview about prayer leading from your knees with Joe Turnham on tomorrow's broadcast. In the meantime, for further information, call us at 860-346-1049. That's 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Paul Kretschmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from WIHS, Middletown.